United States of America is regarded one of the oldest democracies in the world. The country achieved its independence from the British colonizers on 4th July 1776. United States follows a presidential system government and comprises of a federation of autonomous states. It is called a federal constitutional democratic republic in which the president is both the head of state as well as head of government. The executive branch is headed by the president and it is completely independent of legislature. Legislative power is vested in the two chambers of Congress. The judicial branch, composed of the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts, exercise judicial power, and the primary objective is to interpret the United States Constitution appropriately. The United States used to be a colony of Great Britain. In 1776, American colonists objected to being taxed by the British Parliament, as the body had no direct representation of Americans. Before 1760s, Britain's American colonies enjoyed a high level of autonomy in their internal affairs and were governed by their own legislatures. However, the passage of Stamp Act in 1765 imposed internal taxes on the colonies, which led to colonial protest. Many representatives of several colonies met with each other. The tensions relaxed with British repeal of the Stamp Act, but flared again in 1767, which ultimately led to the Boston Massacre. This, along with the closing of the Boston Harbor and the Boston Tea Party, led to the American Revolution War, led by General George Washington, who went on to become the first President of the United States. The American Revolutionary War went on till 1783. The war finally ended with the surrender of General Lord Cornwallis to the Continental American Army. What it led to was independence of the United States from British Empire, end of the British colonial rule, end of the First British Empire, and thus began the Age of Revolution, which went on to several countries of Europe, such as France. In 1787, 39 delegates of the 13 different colonies signed the document that went on to become the US Constitution. It was a continuation of the Declaration of Independence that was signed in 1776. Its basis, as written by Thomas Jefferson, was that it recognized rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as common for all citizens. However, the Constitution continued to recognize slavery as a legal economic system. A federal structure of the government refers to the equitable distribution of power and decision-making capacity between the center and states. It is a form of political organization that seeks to distinguish between states and unite them by a central decision-taking body. Federalism has, since the inception of the United States, been popular. The most forceful defense of the new Constitution was the Federalist Papers, which was a compilation of 85 anonymous essays published in New York City to convince the people to vote for ratification of the Constitution. Today, the United States has over 50 states, 5 major territories, and 1 federal district, which is the capital of Washington, D.C. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution encourages a very cooperative form of federalism between the states and the center. Every state in the United States has its own legislature, that is, a lawmaking body. It has its own executive, that is, the government that passes those laws, and judiciary, courts that ratify laws and clarify whether they are constitutional or not. The members of the state legislature make laws for the state in all matters except the ones that are related to interstate matters. Such issues are handled by the federal government. The states and the districts have their own courts, and those courts have elected judges. However, as politics started to become more polarized, party politics started to affect the federal structure. States that have, say, democratic government often got less support from the federal government if it was held by a Republican. The United States has a presidential system of government. This means that the president is both head of state as well as head of government. The president is not responsible to the legislature, and he is directly elected by the people through universal adult franchise. Article 2 of the United States Constitution vests executive power in the President of the United States. The Constitution directs the President to take care that the laws can be faithfully executed and requires the President to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The President and Vice President are normally elected as running mates, meaning they are elected together by Electoral College. Each state has a number of electoral votes equal to the size of its congressional delegation. The daily enforcement and administration of federal laws is in the hands of the various federal executive departments, which are created by Congress but overseen by the President of the United States. It's the President's duty to appoint members of Cabinet. The Cabinet is a body which consists of the heads of the executive branches, federal executive departments. It is regarded as the principal advisory body to the President of the United States. The President is not formally a member of the Cabinet. The heads of departments appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate are members of the Cabinet, and they all sit together at Cabinet meetings. The President may designate heads of other agencies and non-Senate confirmed members as well. The Cabinet does not have any collective executive powers of its own, and hence no votes need to be taken. Some of these Cabinet members are Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Treasury Secretary, Secretary of Housing, etc. When President appoints these members, they have to be ratified by the US legislature. The members of the Cabinet serve only until the pleasure of the President. The United States, as mentioned before, has a federal structure both at the center and state. Both center and state have legislatures of their own. This legislature is divided into two houses: House of Representatives, which is the lower house, and Senate, which is the upper house. Together, they are both called the US Congress. The House of Representatives currently consists of 435 members. Each of these members represents a congressional district. The number of representatives each state has is based on the state's population. The Senate, on the other hand, is made up of 2 senators from each state, regardless of population. Currently, there are 100 members in the House Senate, 2 from each of the 50 states. These members serve 6-year terms, and 1/3 of the Senate stands for election every 2 years. The US Supreme Court is the highest court of the country. Article 3 of the Constitution establishes the Supreme Court and authorizes the United States Congress to establish inferior courts as their need arises. The US Supreme Court decides cases and controversies, matters pertaining to the federal government, disputes between states, interpretation of the United States Constitution, and in general can declare legislation or executive action made at any level of the government as unconstitutional, thereby nullifying the law and creating precedent for future law and decisions. The judges of the Supreme Court are all appointed by the President of the United States, but they have to undergo a rigorous interview of the Senate. The United States Supreme Court is considered the final interpreter of the US Constitution. Any amendment that is passed by the legislature has to be ratified by the court. The state court adjudicates disputes in connection to matters that have occurred within a state's borders. Every state is free to manage its own courts and deal with civil or criminal cases. State courts have elected judges and they are not selected by the executive. A state court is bound only by the US Supreme Court's interpretation of the federal law. However, it is not bound by interpretation of federal law by the Federal Court of Appeals. Conversely, a federal district court hearing a matter involving only a question of state law must apply the law of the state in which the court sits. The vast majority of states have judges who are elected, but the methods of appointment for judges may vary. State court judges are usually distinguished attorneys who had some sort of political involvement and who are pursuing second careers on the bench. Thank you for listening. Now let us solve some multiple choice questions. Question 1. Who appoints the members of the cabinet? A. The Secretary of State. B. The House of Representatives. C. US Supreme Court. Or D. President of the United States. Correct answer is D. President of the United States. In the US, the President is both the head of state as well as head of government. He is the chief executive and the cabinet members are appointed by him. These members constitute of Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Treasury Secretary, Housing Secretary, etc. And these portfolios are all appointed by the President himself. However, every appointee has to be ratified by the US Congress, which is the legislature of the United States. Next question. Members of the Senate are A. Elected by universal adult franchise. B. Elected by members of House of Representatives. C. Appointed by the President after consultation with his cabinet. Or D. Appointed by Supreme Court justices. Correct answer A. Elected by universal adult franchise. Universal adult franchise is a system which allows every legal citizen the right to vote and choose his own representatives. US Senate members are essentially the upper house of the US Congress, which is US legislature. They are elected directly by the citizens, both at the federal level as well as the state level.